She carried a newborn on her chest while lifting crates twice her weight. No rest, no mercy, just orders. But one stranger on horseback didn't look away and didn't ride on either. The lash didn't always land. That was the only mercy Alora had left. It cracked through the dry morning air like thunder, sometimes inches away, sometimes square across her back. When it missed, the sound still made her flinch. And every time she flinched, the newborn tied to her chest whimpered like his world might end. She'd whisper his name, Micah, and keep walking, because stopping wasn't allowed, resting wasn't allowed, drinking unless told wasn't allowed, and crying meant worse. Crying meant weakness, and weakness wasn't tolerated where she worked. The barrels she carried weren't just heavy, they were meant to break her. They knew she was 12. They knew Micah was barely a month old. They just didn't care. In that sun-scorched storage yard tucked behind rusted fences and warehouse walls, nobody asked how she ended up there. Nobody asked who Micah was. Nobody cared that her arms trembled or that the dirty sling across her chest was slowly coming loose. They just yelled more, pushed more, demanded more. And still she obeyed. One boot in front of the other. One splintered barrel at a time. Because if she disobeyed, she'd be separated from Micah, and she wouldn't survive that. She hadn't always been this way. She used to believe in things like school and birthdays and warm bread. She used to braid her mother's hair while humming lullabies she didn't understand. That was before the fire. Before the house burned down with both her parents inside. Before her uncle, a man who saw her as nothing more than an inconvenience, shoved her into the back of a supply wagon and dropped her here like unwanted freight. The men who ran the labor yard didn't question it. They handed her a kerchief, pointed to the crates, and barked her hours. 12-hour days, one meal, one cup of water, no arguments. Micah had been born just days before they were brought here. No one had believed she could care for a baby, especially not while working. But somehow, by grace or willpower, she'd kept him alive. She de-learned how to feed him scraps, how to soothe him even while her own ribs showed, how to wrap her body around his so he wouldn't feel the cold at night. She never asked for help. She knew help didn't come. Until the man on the horse stopped watching and started riding closer. He hadn't come with the usual wagons. He wasn't dusty like the foreman or cruel like the guards. His coat was clean, dark like a storm cloud, and his hat shaded eyes that didn't squint with malice. He was tall, thin, not young but not old. A face carved from grief and silence. The kind of face that said he'd seen too much and learned to live with it. A widower's face. And still he watched her. The first day he passed by on his way to town. She caught his glance as she hoisted a broken crate onto her shoulder. Their eyes met. He flinched. She looked away. The second day he slowed his horse by the fence, pretended to check his saddle strap. But he watched. When she dropped the crate and scrambled to catch the newborn as the sling slipped, he moved forward in his seat. She steadied herself, wiped Micah's cheek, and stood tall again. The third day, he didn't ride by. He dismounted. It was unheard of. Outsiders didn't get close. They weren't allowed. Yet there he stood by the outer gate just beyond the rusted chain and twisted barbed wire, watching, waiting. One of the foremen noticed. He marched over, barking something about private property. The man didn't flinch, just tipped his hat and said 5 words that made every head turn. She shouldn't be carrying that. The silence was instant, the kind that stretched and snapped in your chest. The foreman sneered, said the girl was paid, barely true, and told him to keep riding. The man didn't. He leaned forward on the gate, eyes still locked on her. "She's a child," he said, "and she's carrying another." The foreman spat at the dirt, cursing him under his breath. Said if he wanted a fight, he could have one. Said this was no place for do-gooders. The man didn't blink. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper, a land deed, fresh ink. "I'm not a do-gooder," he said. "I'm your new neighbor." That shut the foreman up. He snatched the paper, read it twice, cursed it again, then waved him off like a pest. But the man didn't leave. He turned back to his horse, but his eyes stayed on Alora. She felt them, like heat on her neck. That night something changed. Instead of the usual gruel, there was slightly better stew. Instead of sleeping in the shed, she was allowed to curl under the tarp near the fire barrels. Not mercy, fear. The foreman didn't want trouble, and trouble had arrived wearing a black coat and a name they didn't yet know. But she didn't trust it, not yet. Not when kindness had a price. The next day he came back again, this time with bread in his bag. He didn't offer it, just left it by the gate, a nod in her direction, a gesture. Micah cried that night, not from hunger but from the bread, too rich. His body wasn't used to it. She held him close and cried too. But the next morning she walked straighter, lifted the barrels higher, not for them, for herself, for Micah, because someone had looked and not turned away. On the fifth day, everything changed. Elora was ordered to load a cart stacked with fencing posts. It was too heavy even for a full-grown man, but they didn't care. She tried. The straps snapped. The posts collapsed. Micah rolled from her chest, hitting the ground with a soft thud. He wailed. She dove for him. The foreman shouted. Then the whip cracked. But it didn't land. A hand caught it. The man in the black coat stood there, whip wrapped around his fist, his eyes full of fire. The foreman screamed for the guards, but the man didn't move. He stepped in front of Elora, raised one hand, and said 7 words that scattered everyone around him. Touch them again, and I bury you. Silence, then chaos. But Elora wasn't listening. She clutched Micah, her arms shaking. Her lips whispered his name over and over. And when she finally looked up, he was still standing there, between her and everything that had ever hurt her. The yard exploded into motion, but the man in the black coat didn't flinch. One hand still held the whip midair, the other calmly reached behind his coat. He didn't pull a weapon, not yet, but something about his stillness was louder than a shout. The foreman took a step back. The guards hesitated. Nobody wanted to make the first mistake. Micah was crying again, that high, fragile cry that had haunted Elora every night, but she barely heard him. Her gaze locked on the man's boots. They stood between her and the men who'd worked her to the bone, who shoved food bowls toward her like she was something between a dog and a burden. She'd never seen anyone do that, stand in front of her like she was worth protecting. Let her go, the man said, voice even, quiet but cutting through the tension like a knife. You're not touching her again. The whip dropped from his hand. The foreman's jaw moved, trying to form words, but nothing came. The other workers had stopped lifting, stopped hauling. Even the sun felt like it paused above them. Dust floated midair. Elora's knees felt water-weak, but she pressed Micah close, rocking without realizing it. The man turned then, crouching low. You're all right, girl, he said softly, voice losing its edge. Your name. Elora didn't answer, couldn't. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her grip on Micah only tightened. His soft whimpers grew quiet, as if even he sensed the air had shifted. The man gave her a nod. My name's Silas, he said, not demanding a response. I live about 4 miles out. No wife, no children, just quiet and land. She blinked. Silas. That name clung to the dust like a promise. I ain't gonna take him from you, he said, nodding toward Micah. Or you, I just want to help. A scoff came from behind them. The foreman had found his voice again. You can't just walk in and take what doesn't belong to you. Silas stood. That's where you're wrong, he said. Children aren't property, and neither of them belong here. You got no papers, no rights, no law behind you. Silas reached into his coat again. This time he pulled out more than a land deed. A document stamped with the county seal, signed by the circuit judge. Temporary guardianship rights. His signature, the sheriff's, the preacher's. He'd come prepared. I've got more law behind me than you ever dreamed, Silas said, voice like gravel. The foreman didn't argue. He just spat near the dirt again and barked at 2 workers to return to loading crates. They hesitated, glancing toward Silas, unsure. The spell had broken, but the aftershocks still trembled in every corner. Elora didn't understand all the words, but she knew enough. The paper, the protection, the fact that this man, this stranger, had spoken her name out loud even when she hadn't said it yet. He turned back to her. "Can you walk?" She nodded. "Then we leave now." She started to rise slowly because Micah's weight dragged at her spine, but then stopped. "What about my things?" she asked, voice hoarse from disuse. Silas shook his head. "You got him, that's all that matters." She stared down at Micah. His cheeks were sunken, skin pale, lips dry, but his eyes were open, looking up at her like he always did, like she was his whole world. Maybe she was. Silas offered a hand. Elora stared at it for a long moment. Then she took it. He didn't grip too tight, didn't yank or pull, just steadied her like he'd done this before. Maybe he had. Maybe this wasn't the first broken soul he'd carried out of a place like this, but something in his face said it was the first time he wanted to. They walked through the yard in silence. Not a single worker moved to stop them. Not one hand reached for a shoulder or a sling. Not even the foreman made another threat. They just watched, stone still, as the girl who used to sleep beside barrels and carry lumber bigger than her limbs walked toward the fence with the man in black. Silas lifted the latch himself, held it open. Elora stepped through. And just like that, she was on the other side. The horse, a bay mare with kind eyes and a rough mane, whinnied softly. Silas helped her up, careful of Micah. She'd never ridden before. Her whole body tensed. But when he swung into the saddle behind her and wrapped one arm gently around her waist, she didn't pull away. They rode. For the first few minutes, Elora said nothing. But then, as the labor yard shrank behind her, she whispered, "Why?" Silas didn't ask what she meant. He just looked ahead, voice low. "My wife prayed every day for a child, but the doctors said no. For years we watched other folks raise babies. Then cancer took her. I buried her by the chapel last fall. Thought I'd never see the inside of a home again." He paused. "Then I saw you." Elora stared at the sky. Her throat felt tight. "You don't know us," she whispered. "I didn't need to." They rode on in silence. It wasn't a grand house that came into view, just a small wooden home nestled between the pines. A barn, a chicken coop, an old swing hanging from a crooked tree. But to Elora, it looked like heaven. Silas helped her down. He opened the door. She stepped inside. And for the first time in what felt like years, she exhaled. There was bread on the table, warm, a blanket on the couch, clean, a fireplace still holding the glow of earlier coals. She touched it all like it might vanish. He handed her a bowl. "Eat." She took it with shaking hands. Micah stirred in her sling. Silas noticed. "There's a crib upstairs, never used, wouldn't mind if he was the first." Her hands froze. "You mean we stay?" Silas crouched before her, gaze level. "As long as you want." A log cracked in the hearth. Micah cooed, reaching for a curl of her hair. Elora felt something break inside, something good, something necessary. She looked up at Silas and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't smile, just nodded. But his eyes said everything. Elora hadn't known how to sleep in a bed. Not really. The first night she didn't. She laid stiff under the patchwork quilt, still wrapped around Micah, staring at the ceiling like it would collapse on them. Every creak of the wooden boards, every gust of wind against the shutters made her flinch. Her back ached, not from labor but from stillness. Her body didn't know how to rest. Micah slept soundly, belly full for the first time in days. His little fists curled and uncurled against her chest, and his lips formed tiny dreams she couldn't guess at. For once, he didn't cough. He didn't fuss. He just breathed. and it made Alora cry quietly into the quilt, not because she was scared, but because she was. Downstairs she could hear Silas moving about, not pacing, not barking orders, just existing. She had grown used to men who made the ground shake with their steps, whose silence meant punishment, whose words came only with commands or demands. But Silas was different. He'd left a cup of milk by her bedside, still warm, and a note written in careful letters she could barely read. "When you're ready." She didn't know what to do with kindness, so she held it like a brittle thing, afraid it would shatter. The next morning the sun came in through thin curtains. Alora sat up slowly, squinting at the brightness. Micah stirred against her. His cheeks had color again, a faint pink that reminded her of spring petals. She took him downstairs. The house smelled like bread again, and something with cinnamon. Silas was at the stove, his sleeves rolled up, his hat hanging by the door. He turned as she entered but didn't speak right away. He just gave a nod, then slid another plate onto the table. "I don't got much," he said simply, "but what I have's yours." She looked at the plate. Eggs, a heel of bread, a smear of jam, a clean fork. Micah fussed and Silas reached over to pull a chair close to the hearth, where a cradle now sat. He had made it overnight. Alora realized it with a jolt. It was crude but sturdy, lined with a folded quilt, maybe his wife's. Alora approached it slowly, then laid Micah down, her hands trembling. He didn't cry. He blinked once, yawned, and curled onto his side. She sat. They ate. Silas didn't ask her questions. He didn't push. He just talked, mostly to the room, about the land, about the chickens, about how his late wife used to sing while she worked. Alora listened, slowly thawing with each word. It took days before she said more than 2 sentences in a row. And when she did, it came out like a flood. She was washing a dish by the basin when she suddenly said, "They used to put moldy bread in the corner for me. Said it was enough." Silas looked up from where he was repairing a saddle strap. "They'd eat at the table," she continued, voice even. "Laugh and talk. I wasn't allowed to sit. I had to sweep during meals, had to earn my crust." He didn't interrupt. Micah wasn't even named until I named him. I didn't know how to take care of a baby. I just knew he was mine. No one else would touch him. Silas put the leather aside. She kept talking. About the long nights under the open barn roof, about the blisters, about the time she'd almost passed out but kept working anyway. How she sang to Micah so he'd stay warm. How she once gave him her last bite of stale cornbread and chewed on wood to keep her stomach from growling. "I didn't know what kindness sounded like," she whispered, "until you said my name." Silas nodded once. "You don't have to earn anything here," he said. "You're not a servant, you're a child." She wiped her face with her sleeve, breathing sharp. "What if I don't know how to be that?" "Then we learn together." Silas kept to his word. He didn't treat her like someone broken. He gave her tasks, light ones. Feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, helping stir stew. She could say no and he wouldn't get angry. She learned to read from his wife's Bible. He'd point to the verses, say them out loud, and she'd repeat. Micah gained weight, started smiling, started reaching for Silas when he entered the room. At first Alora flinched at that, protective. But then she saw Silas bend low, his hands always soft, his voice always gentle. One day Micah giggled, loud. Silas cried. She pretended not to see. But the more she watched, the more she wondered something awful. What if it didn't last? One night, as thunder rolled far off in the hills, she stood by Silas's door. He hadn't heard her. She gathered the courage and knocked once. "Come in," he said. She did. "Can you promise something?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He looked up from the book he was reading. "What's that?" She clutched the doorframe. "That if someone comes for us, you won't let them take us." Silas set the book down. "I already told the county," he said. "You're under my guardianship. No one's claiming you. They wouldn't dare." "But what if they lie? What if they say I stole him, or I'm not fit to be with him? Sela stood. He didn't move toward her, just stood. Elora, he said gently, the moment you walked out of that yard with him in your arms, I knew you're more than fit. You saved him, you saved yourself, and now you're saving me. She blinked, confused. He smiled, the kind that cracked something open. I hadn't spoken to another soul in months, just me and these ghosts. But when I saw you, I remembered who I was. I remembered why I built this home. It wasn't for the harvest. It wasn't for the livestock. It was for a family. He hesitated. I didn't think I'd ever have one. She stepped into the room slowly. Micah calls you Ba. Silas looked surprised. He's trying to say Papa, she said softly. It's the only word he's got right now. Silas's hand pressed to his chest. I hope someday he means it. He already does, she said. They stood there, thunder rolling, wind brushing against the windows. And in that moment, neither of them were alone anymore. The next morning, trouble came. A man on horseback, sheriff's badge glinting. A woman beside him, sharp features, expensive dress, lips curled like she'd smelled something foul. The sheriff didn't look angry, just tired. Silas stepped off the porch, Elora clutching Micah behind him. She says she's the mother, the sheriff muttered, almost apologetically. Elora's heart fell through her ribs. The woman pointed, not at Elora but at Micah. That child was born in my sister's house, she snapped. The girl took him, she ran off. Silas turned. Elora, he said, voice low. I didn't steal him, she whispered. She left him. She never even touched him after he was born. I begged her to feed him, but she said he wasn't her problem. She's lying, the woman screeched. That's my nephew. Did you file a missing person report? Silas asked the sheriff. No, the man said. Did she ever seek custody? No. Then she's not his mother in the eyes of the law. Elora is protected under my guardianship, and unless there's a warrant or a court order, you're trespassing. The woman huffed. The sheriff adjusted his hat. We'll be going now, he said. And just like that, they rode off. Silas turned to Elora. She was shaking, but Micah was calm. He had fallen asleep in her arms again, unaware of the battle just fought. I told you, Silas said, you're safe here. She didn't respond. She just walked into his arms. And for the first time since her mother died, she allowed herself to believe it. Winter came earlier than expected that year, blanketing the ranch in a quiet hush that muffled the world and turned everything into a canvas of white. The land Silas once worked tirelessly now slumbered under frost, its routine slowed by the bite of cold. But inside the little farmhouse nestled at the edge of the woods, warmth bloomed, not just from the fire crackling in the stone hearth, but from the slow, undeniable truth that 3 hearts had begun to beat in rhythm. Elora had started smiling more. Not big, not loudly, but it was there, subtle and soft like frost melting in sunlight. When she poured milk into Micah's tin cup, when she caught Silas humming while chopping wood, when she sat beside the fireplace and watched the flames with eyes that no longer looked for danger in the shadows. She still flinched sometimes, still paused when a door creaked or a stranger's horse passed too close. But she'd come back. Her eyes wouldn't go far anymore. She knew where home was now. And Micah, he laughed. Belly-deep baby giggles that echoed off the wooden walls and made Silas choke up more than once. The boy had learned to crawl across the woven rugs and bang his tiny fists on Silas's boots, demanding attention. He was growing strong, and Elora marveled every day at what food, rest, and love could do to bones once starved. She sang to him again, quiet lullabies. Her voice wasn't polished, but it was tender, and Silas found himself lingering in doorways to listen, heart aching in the best way. Sometimes he'd remember the echo of his wife's laughter, how it used to ring through these same halls. And then he'd look at Elora, seated in the corner with Micah nestled in her arms, her head tilted as she sang him into dreams, and the ache inside him turned into something else entirely. Purpose. They had built something sacred. But life, even the good kind, doesn't forget where you came from, and sometimes it sends reminders not as warnings but as tests. It started with a wagon. Early one morning, Silas had hitched up his team to head into town for supplies. They didn't need much: flour, salt, a new pair of boots for Alora since her toes were starting to poke through the old pair. She didn't ask for them, but Silas noticed anyway. He always noticed now. Alora had begged to come. She hadn't left the property in months, and part of her wanted to see if the world was different through new eyes. Silas agreed on one condition: Micah stayed warm, wrapped against her chest, and she never left his side. She promised. They rode into town just as the sun rose over the flat fields. Smoke curled from chimneys. Horses pawed at frozen ground. The general store's bell jingled as they stepped inside. At first, no one paid attention. Until they did. A woman standing near the counter squinted toward Alora, eyes narrowing. Then another man leaned closer to his wife and whispered behind a gloved hand. Silas stood a little straighter. The clerk, a portly man with thinning hair, greeted him with forced cheer. "Rancher Holt," he said, "didn't expect to see you in this weather." "Needed a few things," Silas replied, voice even. He handed over the list. The clerk took it, then cast a glance at Alora. She was holding Micah close, face downcast, not meeting anyone's gaze. "That the girl?" the clerk asked quietly. "The one they were talking about?" Silas's jaw set. "What they're talking about," he said slowly, "is none of their business." "I don't mean trouble," the man said quickly. "Just folks are curious. Girl shows up with a baby, you taking her in like kin, not everyone understands." "I don't need them to." The man nodded nervously and scurried off to fill the order. Alora didn't speak until they were back in the wagon. "They all looked at me like I was something dirty," she whispered. "They don't know you. They think I'm lying about Micah. You know the truth, that's all that matters." "But what if someone comes again?" Silas tightened the reins, the horses stamping their hooves. "Then they'll have to go through me." She didn't speak again the whole ride back. But something inside her curled up tight. That night, after the snow started falling again, Alora sat awake while Micah slept beside her. She was staring at the window, watching snowflakes melt against the glass, when she said softly, "I don't want to be your burden." Silas, seated in his chair by the fire, didn't move. "You're not. I mean it, you gave us everything, and I haven't given anything back." He looked at her then. "Alora, you gave me something I thought I'd never have again, a reason to live." She shook her head. "I'm just a kid, and Micah's just a baby. Your family, that's what you are." She hesitated. "Then let me work." He raised an eyebrow. "I mean it, I want to learn to help. I don't want to just be taken care of, I want to take care back." Silas studied her for a long moment, then he nodded. And so the next morning, Alora started helping on the ranch. Not in the way she had in that place of torment, where labor was punishment and rest was sin, but in the way families do. Side by side with Silas, learning how to mend fences, feed the horses, repair the chicken coop. She asked questions, took notes. Her hands grew calloused, but her smile grew too. She was changing. Not into something new, but into who she had always been beneath the pain. Then one day, a letter came. It arrived folded and sealed in red wax, no return address, just Silas's name. He opened it slowly at the kitchen table. Alora watched from the doorway, holding Micah. The lines on Silas's face deepened as he read. When he finished, he stared into the middle distance for a long while. "What is it?" she asked. He folded the letter carefully. The state's sending a man to inspect the property, he said. Wants to verify the suitability of your living arrangement. She went pale. They're coming to take us. No, Silas said firmly. They're coming to try. What if they think I'm not good enough? They'll have to look me in the eye and say it, and I won't let them. But still, that night she didn't sleep. When the inspector arrived 3 days later, it was with a cold wind and a clipboard. A tall man in a dark coat stepped from his wagon and knocked on the door. Silas answered. "Elora," he said, turning to her, "take Micah to the back room. I'll call you when we're ready." She obeyed. The man's voice carried through the house, calm, formal, laced with authority. He asked questions, inspected shelves, measured the cradle, examined the stove. Then finally, Silas called her in. Elora stepped forward with Micah in her arms. The inspector studied her for a long time. Then he said, "Tell me why you think this is your home." Her mouth went dry. But then she looked at Silas. At Micah. And she found her voice. "Because here I'm not afraid." The inspector didn't respond. He jotted something down, then turned and left. 2 weeks passed. Then a letter came again. Silas opened it at the table. He read it, smiled, handed it to Elora. Approved. Guardianship permanent. She looked up at him, her hands trembling. "You did it," she whispered. "No," he said, voice thick, "we did." And as the snow melted into spring, something new bloomed inside her, something deeper than safety. Belonging. Spring came slowly but surely to the high desert. The sun lingered longer each day, coaxing wildflowers out from between rocks and coloring the sky in warm honey hues as evening settled. The earth cracked open from its long winter sleep, and something inside Elora cracked open with it, not a breaking, but an unfurling. For the first time in her life, she didn't fear tomorrow. But peace can feel unfamiliar to a soul raised on panic. And sometimes, when you start to feel safe, the memories that once kept you alive return to haunt you. Elora was 12 now. Her arms were stronger, her hands steadier. She could patch a fence with baling wire in under 10 minutes, knew how to collect eggs without getting pecked, and had memorized the way Silas liked his coffee, black, barely sweetened. She read to Micah under the old willow tree most afternoons, his tiny head resting on her lap as he gurgled and reached for butterflies with chubby fingers. Micah was walking now, and his laughter had become a part of the ranch's rhythm, as essential as the creaking porch or the rooster's crow. Silas was softer, not in strength. His shoulders still bore the weight of grief and years of ranch work, but in spirit. He smiled more now, even if it was only with his eyes. He laughed sometimes, especially when Elora told stories she made up while mending clothes. He'd begun teaching her how to ride, though his patience far outweighed her confidence. "It's not about making the horse obey," he'd say. "It's about learning how to speak without words." And yet one April morning, as a thunderstorm gathered behind the hills, Elora felt that old ache, like a thread pulling tight from somewhere deep inside. She stood beside the garden bed, knees in the dirt, when the scent of the approaching storm hit her. It smelled like home once, or what used to be called home. The storms had always come with yelling, with doors slammed too hard and chores doubled. Her stepfather had hated when rain made the fields muddy. Hated it even more when she tracked in dirt on her bare feet. A memory, sudden and sharp, punched its way to the front of her mind. Micah crying, her back aching, a belt drawn back in anger. She dropped the trowel, her hands trembled. She stood too quickly, stumbling back from the garden bed. "Whoa there," Silas said, stepping down from the porch. "You all right?" She nodded quickly, too quickly. He saw through it. "Elora." "I'm fine," she said, but her voice cracked. She turned and walked quickly toward the barn, wiping her hands on her apron. Silas didn't follow immediately. He knew that look, the one that said a wound was open and raw, and pressing it too soon would only make it bleed more. Inside the barn, Elora leaned against the stall door and let her breath come in shaky gasps. She hadn't had one of these in months. She thought they were gone. But memory, she was learning, wasn't a straight line. It was a circle, and sometimes it came back around when you least expected it. Micah toddled in moments later, dragging his stuffed rabbit and babbling. He looked up at her, blinked, then raised his arms. "Hug," he said. And just like that she crumbled, fell to her knees and wrapped him close. "Don't leave me," she whispered. "Hugs," he repeated, nuzzling into her neck. Silas found them like that. He didn't speak. He just crouched beside them and put a hand on her shoulder, letting the silence wrap around the three of them like a warm blanket. Later that night by firelight, Elora finally said it. "I thought it was gone," she whispered. "The fear." She nodded. "It won't disappear," Silas said gently, "but it doesn't have to stay in charge." She looked at him. "How do you know?" "Because I've lived with grief for a long time. I still do. It doesn't leave, but you can learn to walk with it." She was quiet for a while. "Does it ever stop hurting?" He looked at the flames for a long time. "No, but it stops owning you." Weeks passed. The ranch bloomed with life. Chicks hatched. Calves were born. Micah's first words formed, mostly jumbled versions of Elora's name and the sound he made when he wanted Silas to pick him up. The three of them became a strange, stitched-together family, one full of silent dinners, whispered bedtime stories, and the kind of quiet healing that doesn't announce itself. And then one evening in June, a letter arrived. It was from the county office. Silas opened it, brow furrowed. Elora stood nearby, arms crossed. "What is it?" He read silently. "They want to conduct a formal review," he said. "Make sure everything's still, in order." She paled. "Again?" He nodded. "They do this sometimes. Routine, they say, but someone must have called something in." "Who?" He looked at her. "I don't know, but we'll face it together." That night Elora sat awake in bed, Micah curled beside her. She thought of everything they'd built, every piece of herself she'd recovered in this place, and she thought of losing it all. She got up, walked outside barefoot. The moon hung low and full. The stars blinked silently. Silas was on the porch. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head. "Are they going to take us?" "No." "But what if they do?" He looked at her. "Elora, I will fight for you with every breath in me. You hear me? You're not going anywhere." Her voice trembled. "I don't want to go back to being a thing." He stood, walked over, and placed both hands on her shoulders. "You're not a thing, you're my daughter." The word hit like a storm, not loud but earth-shaking. She looked at him, eyes wide. "You mean that?" "I've meant it every day since the first night you fell asleep in front of that fireplace." She didn't respond, just nodded and threw her arms around him. The next morning, the inspector arrived. A different one this time, a woman, tall, stoic, clipboard in hand. She asked questions, inspected the kitchen, checked Micah's crib, asked Elora to describe her daily routine. Elora answered every question clearly, with her chin up. Then the woman asked, "Do you consider this man your legal guardian?" Elora paused. "No," she said. The inspector raised an eyebrow. "He's not my guardian." Silas blinked. Elora turned, eyes fierce. "He's my father." The inspector looked between them, then quietly marked something down. She left without another word. A week passed. Then two. Then a third. Another letter came. Silas opened it. He read, then handed it to Elora. "Case closed, permanent custody granted." She stared at the words. Are we safe? He nodded. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for 3 years. And then, like spring through the desert floor, something new began to grow. A life not of survival, but of abundance, of trust, of family. But just when things began to settle, a shadow loomed again. One afternoon, while gathering eggs, Elora spotted a man near the tree line, watching the ranch. She froze. He saw her, smiled, and vanished into the trees. She ran to the house, breath coming fast. Silas. He came running. There was a man watching us. He smiled when he saw me. Silas's face darkened. Where? She pointed. Without another word, he grabbed his rifle and took off toward the woods. But the man was gone. Only boot prints remained. And the smell of smoke. Not wood smoke. Cigar smoke. They didn't sleep much that night. Elora lay wide awake beside Micah, watching the flickering lamplight on the ceiling as thunder rolled in far off, muted by distance but heavy with promise. Somewhere in the world, rain was coming. But it wasn't the weather she feared. It was the way Silas had looked when he came back from the tree line. His shoulders were tight, his eyes darting constantly over her shoulder. Dee said nothing, only walked her back to the house, checked every lock on every door, and sat down with the rifle leaning on the table beside him like an old friend he hadn't wanted to visit again. The next morning, he was gone before dawn. Elora found a note by the coffee pot. Went to sheriff's, stay inside, watch Micah, don't open for no one but me. It was the first time in months she'd felt that old fear in her gut again, not the fear of pain but of being left behind, of silence swallowing everything. She pressed her hand to the newborn folds of her apron, worn now from months of use, and she reminded herself, he always comes back. He always comes back. Micah stirred in his crib. He was starting to say more now, words jumbled and clumsy but full of meaning. His favorite was wah, his version of why, and she answered everyone with patience, even when she didn't know. But that day he just stared at her, eyes bright but quiet, as if sensing the tension too thick to name. By the time Silas returned, the sun had climbed high, and the shadows had shrunk short. He came through the door slowly, jaw clenched. Sheriff didn't find no one, he said. Tracks ended in a creek, probably been covered by now. Elora watched him carefully. You think he'll come back? Silas met her gaze. I think if he does, he'll regret it. She said nothing, just nodded. But deep down she knew it wasn't over. That kind of smile didn't belong to strangers. That was the kind of smile that meant I know you. And she was right. 3 days later it rained. The heavens cracked open like a broken dam, and water poured down in silver sheets. Elora and Micah stayed inside all morning, watching the storm from the window, whispering stories. Silas had gone out to check the fence line. He promised to be back by noon. But noon passed. Then 1 o'clock. Then 2. And by 3, worry had turned to dread. Elora bundled Micah in a shawl, wrapped herself in Silas's coat, and ran out into the storm. She called for him, her voice lost in the wind. Silas, Silas. No answer. She reached the barn, threw open the doors, and stopped. He was there. Face down. Blood on the hay. No, she screamed, dropping to her knees beside him. He groaned. He was alive. Her hands shook as she rolled him over, a gash across his temple, bruises blooming along his jaw. His shirt was ripped, muddy. Elora, he rasped. He was here, the man. Who is he? She cried. But Silas didn't answer. His eyes rolled back. And he passed out cold. She didn't scream again. She acted. She dragged the heavy water bucket toward the well, splashed it over his face, pressed a rag to his head. Micah stood nearby, silent, watching with wide, terrified eyes. She got Silas into the house. How, she didn't remember. Her arms moved like someone else's. She remembered wrapping him in blankets, lighting the fire, holding his hand as his breathing evened. Hours passed. Then his eyes opened. "Alora," he whispered, "the man, he called you by name." She froze. "What name?" "Your old one." Her chest tightened. She hadn't heard it in over a year. "Eliza," he said. He said, "Tell Eliza I ain't finished." She sat back dizzy. Her stepfather, he was alive. She thought he died in a rail accident. Rumors had swirled months after she fled, but no one knew for sure. He'd vanished same time the factory closed. She never looked back. But now... Silas squeezed her hand. "We can't stay here." "You mean leave the ranch?" His face was grave. "I mean leave tonight." Lightning flashed. The world felt suddenly too small. By nightfall, the wagon was loaded. Only essentials. Clothes, food, a small pouch of Silas's savings, a silver pocket watch once belonging to his father. Alora didn't cry. She couldn't afford it. Her fingers worked fast, braiding Micah's blanket tighter, double-checking the oil in the lantern. Silas moved slower, still weak from the blow. "I'm sorry," he said as they packed. "For what?" "For bringing danger back to your life." She looked at him. "You didn't bring it, it followed me." And in that moment, they were no longer just wounded souls under the same roof. They were a unit, a family. They set out after midnight, wheels creaking down the muddy trail. The rain had slowed, but the air was thick with it, and every shadow felt alive. Silas held the reins with one hand, the other resting on the rifle across his lap. Alora sat beside him, Micah between them, asleep against her shoulder. "Where will we go?" she asked quietly. "There's a friend I know south of the ridge, preacher turned blacksmith. He'll help us, and he's got a dog meaner than sin. Think he'll take us in. I'd bet my last breath on it." They rode in silence for hours. Then hoofbeats. Behind them. Vast. Hard. Silas didn't look back. He didn't need to. "Hold on," he said. The wagon surged forward. "Is it him?" Alora asked, voice thin. Silas didn't answer. She turned, just in time to see a figure on horseback burst from the trees. A scarred face. A hat she remembered all too well. Her stepfather. She screamed. Silas cracked the reins. The wagon groaned with speed. "Micah," she cried, shielding the baby with her body. A shot rang out. The horses reared. The wagon tipped. And everything went black. When Alora came to, the world was upside down. Literally. She was trapped under the wagon, rain pouring through the broken slats above her. "Micah," she screamed. Silence. Silas. Nothing. She pushed, kicked, clawed her way free. Her leg burned, probably broken. But she moved. She found Micah first, crying, wet but alive. She pulled him close. Then Silas. Lying still. Too still. And he was. Footsteps in the mud. Laughter. "You thought you could run, girl," the man called. "You ain't ever leaving me again." She stood. Faced him. Mud on her cheek, blood on her hands. Micah sobbing in her arms. And she didn't shake. "You're not taking us," she said. He grinned. "I ain't here to ask." He raised his pistol. And that's when Silas fired. From the ground. One shot. Straight through the man's chest. He staggered. Fell. Didn't get up. Silas passed out again. But this time, it wasn't from blood loss. It was relief. And Elora. She cried then. Not from fear, but from freedom. They weren't running anymore. They were home. And come morning, they'd bury the past for good. The earth swallowed him whole. Silas stood over the grave, shovel heavy in his hand, mud caked to the cuffs of his pants, the early morning wind cutting sharp against his skin. Elora didn't cry this time. Neither did Micah. The baby stood beside her, holding onto the hem of her dress, his tiny fingers curling in the fabric as though even now, in all this strange peace, he needed something to hold onto. The grave was shallow, no cross, no name. They didn't speak a word over it. There was no forgiveness in the air. Only silence. Silas leaned on the shovel once the last of the dirt was tamped down. His face was pale, drawn, sweat and rain soaked into his hair and shirt. The bruises on his jaw were deepening, turning from red to black. "You didn't have to kill him," Elora said softly. Silas didn't look at her. "I did, you just don't know it yet." She wanted to protest, to argue the worth of life, to say something noble or righteous, but the truth sat on her chest like a stone. That man would never have stopped. No law would have held him. No apology would have changed him. The law hadn't saved her. Love had. Love and a bullet. They walked back to the house slowly. Micah hummed something, not a song really, just a string of soft noises like a melody he didn't know the words to. His fingers still clenched the edge of Elora's dress. She carried him halfway, then Silas took over when her arms tired. There were no more shadows in the trees, no more fear in the corners of the barn, but inside her chest something was still stirring. Not fear. A kind of ache. The ache of being safe, when for years she'd only known survival. That night they sat at the table together, 3 plates full, fire glowing steady in the hearth. Silas had found a jar of wild honey in the cellar and poured a spoonful over Micah's cornbread. The child's laughter rang out like wind chimes through the room. Elora watched him, her hand hovering over her own bread. "I don't know how to live normal," she said finally. "I don't know what it's like to wake up and not expect to run." Silas nodded, "Me neither." She looked at him. The flicker of the fire caught the side of his face, showing the fine lines near his eyes, the healed-over scar near his collarbone. This man, who once thought he'd die digging his own grave, now sat with life in his arms and warmth at his table. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Known what?" "That I wasn't who I said I was." He took a moment. "The night you flinched when I walked behind you, that wasn't the flinch of a stranger. That was the flinch of someone waiting to be hit." Elora looked down. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." She raised her eyes again. "I'm tired of hiding." Then stop. Just like that. It wasn't a grand speech, not a poetic promise, just a man saying what he meant. And she believed him. Silas stood, walked over to the small bookshelf by the fireplace, and pulled out a faded leather-bound book. He handed it to her. "What is it?" "Ledger Old One. My wife used to write in it." Elora flipped it open. The handwriting was delicate, neat. Lists of things, eggs gathered, fence posts fixed, who visited when. But about halfway through the list stopped. A paragraph appeared, then another, then entire pages. "After she passed, I wrote in it too," he said. "Just little thoughts, letters to her, I guess. Never expected anyone else to read 'em." She turned the page and read aloud. "I dreamed of children last night. Their faces weren't clear, but I could hear them laugh. I woke up thinking it was real. Then I remembered the silence, and I went out and dug another post just to feel something." Her throat tightened. Micah tugged on her sleeve. "Read more," he said. So she did. They read together until the fire burned low and the crickets came out and the wind shifted warmer, hinting that spring was on its way. In the weeks that followed, Elora stopped flinching. She took Micah on walks through the field, pointing out birds and bugs, giving names to clouds. Silas taught her how to fix a fence, clean a rifle, mend a saddle. She taught him how to soften bread with steam and how to rock Micah to sleep even during a thunderstorm. The ranch came alive again. Silas rebuilt the chicken coop with stronger wood. Elora painted the porch white. Micah started saying full sentences. His favorite, repeated each morning as the sun rose through the curtains. "Are we safe now?" And every day Silas answered, "Yes, we are." One afternoon, Silas found Elora sitting by the stream. She was humming something, low and soft, not quite a lullaby. Micah napped beside her in the grass. He sat down. "You miss the city." She shook her head. "I miss belonging." He said nothing for a moment, then reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out a small, worn piece of folded paper. She took it, opened it. It was a letter, a short one, written in his handwriting. "To whom it may concern. If you are reading this, I am no longer of sound mind or body. I leave the ranch and all my possessions to Elora James, who taught me how to live again, and to her son Micah, who taught me how to hope." It wasn't a will. It was a declaration. She looked up at him. "I'm not your blood," she said. "No," he said, "you're better." Her lip trembled. She didn't cry. She leaned into him instead. And for the first time in a long time, she felt like she wasn't borrowing happiness, but building it. Then one day, they got visitors. 2 horses, a black wagon, a man in a fine suit, and beside him, a woman in lace gloves. They asked for Elora by name. Said they were from the state. Said there'd been an error in paperwork. Said Micah had living relatives. Distant cousins. Blood relatives, the man emphasized. Elora's hands shook as she held Micah close. Silas stepped forward. "You're not taking him." The man raised a brow. "You're not his kin." "I am now," Silas said. "You can check the ledger." The man smiled politely, but his eyes were cold. "I'll be back with a court order." And then he left. Just like that. Like her past had returned again, dressed in finer clothes. That night Silas sat on the porch, the rifle beside him again. Elora stood in the doorway, Micah asleep in her arms. "What do we do?" she asked. He didn't answer. But when she stepped closer, she saw what he was looking at. The stars. Thousands of them. So many it made her dizzy. "We fight," he said. She nodded. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the fight. Because she had something worth losing. Something worth keeping. A family. Her family. 2 weeks passed like a slow, rattling thunderstorm crawling in over a dry plain. Each day began the same. The sun bleeding gold over the horizon, the roosters crowing in the yard, Silas on the porch with his rifle, and Elora with her arms around Micah, half expecting the knock on the door that would come to take him. It didn't come, until it did. It was the 3rd Sunday of April, a dry wind kicking up dust devils in the road and the wild grass brittle from lack of rain. Elora was inside brushing Micah's hair when she heard it. Not a knock. Wheels. Wagon wheels, polished and quiet but unhurried, like someone proud of their arrival. She froze. Micah squirmed in her arms. "They're here." Silas didn't have to say it when she stepped onto the porch. He was already standing at the edge of the property, shoulders tight, jaw set. He'd shaved, put on a clean shirt, and dusted off his boots. Elora followed slowly, the child in her arms tense but quiet, his thumb in his mouth. The same man stepped down from the wagon, the fine coat, the smug half-smile, the document folder under one arm. "Mr. Calder," he said to Silas. Silas didn't answer. "This will be short. A judge reviewed the case. There is no legal adoption on record. That child, he motioned to Micah, is to be placed with his relatives in Carson Valley. No, Alora said, her voice shaking but clear. The man turned to her. You're not his mother, and that man there is not his father. He is at best a squatter on borrowed time. You have no legal claim. Silas stepped forward. Say that again. The man paused, glanced at the rifle by the porch. I don't need to repeat myself. This isn't about emotion, it's law. Alora's hands tightened around Micah. You think law knows what he needs. You think a boy needs blood to know where home is. I think the law exists to keep chaos at bay, the man said, still calm. That child will be safer. He's already safe, Alora cried. He was starving when we found him, skin and bones, carrying grief heavier than you can imagine. He has no one else but us. The man sighed, as if the whole exchange bored him. Emotional attachment does not override legal authority. He stepped forward, took out a folded piece of paper. I'm not asking, I'm telling. Silas didn't flinch, didn't move, but the fire in his eyes grew hotter. You've never worked a field, he said quietly. You've never buried your wife, never sat at night wondering why God left you breathing when everything else you loved was in the dirt. You've never looked at a child and seen your own soul climbing out of a grave you dug yourself into. I'm not letting that boy go. You can take your paper and... Silas, Alora interrupted. Her voice was softer but more urgent. He turned. Micah had said something. What? Silas asked, stepping closer. Micah raised his little face, eyes shining. Don't let them take me. Alora's knees buckled. The man from the state took one more step, but Micah screamed, sharp, piercing, primal. No! He wrapped his arms around Silas's leg, crying now. Loud, messy, chest-heaving sobs that shook his whole body. Papa, don't let them take me, Papa. Silas froze. The title hit him like a thunderclap. Papa. He hadn't asked for it, hadn't earned it, but the boy said it, loud, in front of heaven and man. Papa. The man from the state cleared his throat. This doesn't change anything. Yes, Silas said, it does. He bent down, picked Micah up, and cradled him tight against his chest. I'm not handing over my son. The man narrowed his eyes. Then I'll return with a sheriff. Silas stepped forward. You do that. He turned his back on him, walked to the porch, Alora following in stunned silence. They went inside. The wagon rolled away. And the house stood. They waited. 1 day, 2, 3. No one came. A week. 2. Alora couldn't sleep, neither could Silas. But Micah began laughing again. He planted seeds in the field with Silas, fed the goats, learned how to whistle. Alora taught him how to write his name. She also began writing letters, to the judge, to the town board, to the orphanage, pages and pages of testimony signed and sealed with trembling fingers. The stack grew. Silas added his own. Each letter was a stake in the ground. This boy is ours. You don't get to undo love. You don't get to rewrite family. Weeks passed. Then one day, a letter came back. It was short. Just one sentence. We will not pursue the removal at this time. Alora stared at it, lips trembling. Silas folded the letter, put it in the fire. He didn't want ashes. He wanted days. And those began to come. A year passed. Then 2. Micah grew, his baby face hardened. His feet left prints beside Silas's in the barn. Alora smiled more often. Her laughter came easier. She never told Silas she loved him, not with words, but she cooked with more spice. She stitched his name into his shirts. She stood beside him at the edge of the porch each evening and leaned her shoulder gently into his arm. Micah still called him Papa, and Silas answered without blinking. One morning, Micah looked up from his breakfast and asked, "What's heaven like?" Silas paused. "It's warm," he said, "quiet, safe." Micah nodded. "Like here." Silas glanced out the window at the barn, the fields, the girl he raised like his own. He smiled. "Yeah, like here."